Have you ever been watching a legal drama and just wondered how they actually do that? Well, I'll tell you. It's not really about surprise witnesses and dramatic courtroom confessions. It's about a process, a systematic way of thinking that can take any messy problem and turn it into a clear, logical argument. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and show you exactly how that works. We're cracking the code on how to think like a lawyer. So, let's make this real. Imagine your friend is a designer. She just finished a huge project. The client seemed thrilled right up until they got the bill. Now, all of a sudden, they're saying it's not what they agreed to, and they just won't pay. It feels totally unfair, right? But how do you go from that feeling of injustice to actually building a solid case? Where do you even start? This kind of messy, real-world situation is exactly what this way of thinking is designed to solve. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to lay out the rules of the game, the legal landscape itself. Then we'll fire up the 3-step research engine that powers this whole thing. After that, I'll introduce you to the blueprint for thinking, a little something called FILAC. We'll talk strategy, how to go from broad to specific, and then finally, we'll put it all together to figure out how to help our friend. All right, let's get into it. Before you can even start looking for answers in the law, you gotta understand the system you're working in. You have to know the rules of the game. So we're gonna start there, with the foundation of legal systems you'll find in places like the US, the UK, and other parts of the world. So what is common law? Well, at its heart, it just means that the law isn't all written down in one giant rule book. A huge chunk of it is actually built up over time, decision by decision, in thousands of court cases. Each one of those decisions becomes a judicial precedent, kind of like a brick in the foundation of the law. Okay, so why do all those old cases matter? It all comes down to this one really powerful principle with a fancy Latin name, stare decisis. It literally means to stand by things decided. And this is the engine that makes the whole system run. It means that a judge looking at a case today has to follow the rulings from similar cases in the past. It's what keeps the law consistent and predictable. And this precedent doesn't just flow randomly, it flows downwards. Think of the court system like this inverted pyramid. You've got tons of trial courts down at the bottom, a few appeal courts in the middle, and one Supreme Court at the very top. A decision made by a higher court is absolutely binding on every single court below it. That's why one Supreme Court decision can literally change the law for an entire country. Okay, so we know we need to find these binding precedents. But how? There are millions of cases out there. How do you find the one that matters? Well, that brings us to the actual practical workflow, the 3-step engine that every legal professional uses. It's really a simple 3-part cycle. First, you find the stuff. You're digging through databases, trying to find the right keywords to locate cases that might be relevant. Second, you read what you found. You gotta actually analyze it and see if it really applies. And third, and this is the step that makes all the difference, you have to note up. So what in the world is knotting up? You can think of it like running a background check on a case you found. You're verifying that it's still good law. Has it been overturned by a higher court? Have other judges poked holes in it? You have to do this because the law is always changing, and knotting up is how you make sure you're not building your argument on a legal fossil. And this right here shows you why that background check is absolutely critical. Just imagine, you find a case from 1995, and it looks perfect. It's exactly what you need. You're ready to build your entire argument on it. But you forgot to note it up, and you completely missed that the Supreme Court overturned it 10 years later. Your perfect case is now totally worthless, and your whole argument just fell apart. This step is a deal breaker. So we have the rules of the game, and we have our research engine. Now we need the blueprint. We need a way to assemble all the pieces into a solid, logical argument. And for that, we have an incredibly useful acronym, FILAC. FILAC is basically a mental checklist to organize your thoughts. You start with F for facts. What actually happened here? Then I for issues. What are the specific legal questions we need to answer? L is for law. What are the rules that apply? A is for analysis, and this is where the magic happens. It's where you apply the law to the facts. And finally, C for conclusion. Based on that analysis, what's the likely outcome? It takes a messy problem and gives it structure. But here's the tricky part. As this quote gets at, real-life problems are messy. They don't come in a neat little package where all the important facts and the key issues are just laid out for you. A huge part of the skill is being able to cut through all the noise, identify what facts really matter, and then frame the right questions. If you mess up the facts or the issues, your whole analysis will be built on sand. So let's talk about the L in FILAC, the law. How do you actually find it in the most efficient way? Well, you don't just dive headfirst into an ocean of cases. The smartest strategy is to think like a funnel. You start wide and you gradually narrow your focus. Here's how it works. You start with what are called secondary sources. Think of these like travel guides. They're encyclopedias, articles, and textbooks that give you a great overview of an area of law. They tell you the key landmarks and point you in the right direction. Then, once you're oriented, you move on to the primary sources. These aren't guides, they are the law itself, the actual statutes passed by legislators and the decisions from the courts. Here's a perfect example of what a secondary source looks like. This is a tool called Words and Phrases. It's not binding law, but it's incredibly useful. It's basically a giant legal dictionary that explains what different terms mean, and, most importantly, it gives you a list of the key primary sources, the actual cases that you need to go read. It's the perfect starting point. So, you see, this research funnel strategy is all about working smart. Starting broad with those secondary sources saves you a ton of time. It keeps you from getting lost down a rabbit hole reading a specific case that might not even be relevant. You use the guides to find your target, and then you zoom in on the primary sources for the deep dive. All right, we've gone over the rules of the game, the research engine, the blueprint, and the strategy. Now it's time to put it all together. Let's go back to our friend the designer who's getting stiffed on her invoice and see how this all works in practice. Let's run this through FELAC. The facts are simple. She did the work, they won't pay. The issues: was there a valid contract in the first place, and did the client breach it? For the law, we'd fire up our 3-step engine to find, read, and note up cases about contract law. The analysis is the big one. We compare the facts of our friend's situation, the emails, the proposals, all of it, to the facts in those precedent cases. And that leads to our conclusion. It's not a simple yes or no. The conclusion is that the strength of her case depends entirely on how our evidence stacks up against the legal precedents we found. We now have a clear path to an answer. And that really brings us to the key takeaway. You know, anybody can have an opinion on whether your friend should be paid, but what turns that opinion into a persuasive legal argument? It's the process. It's this methodical, step-by-step approach of finding the rules, analyzing them, and applying them systematically to the facts. And that kind of structured thinking, well, that can bring clarity to just about any complex problem you can imagine.